Good morning, everyone. I'm Stas Margaronis, and I am president of the Propeller Club of Northern California. And we are on our second day of the Storms, Flooding, and Sea Level Defense Conference. We are very grateful to be supported by the Society of American Military Engineers and my colleague, Arvind Acharya. Acharya is here. Acharya would be a Greek name, Arvind, but you look Greek, but not quite, you know. In any case, Arvind, welcome. Thank you very much. Thank you for the support of your organization. Todd Crawshaw, our IT, is here and is doing a yeoman's job. Again, I appreciate that very much, Todd. I am going to once again thank my board at the Propeller Club of Northern California, Ron Brown, Port of Oakland, Kimberly Cartagena, Centerline Logistics Corporation, Greg Feeney at Port Transfer, Nick Marone at the Seafarers International, Susan Sullivan, Pasha Group, Anita Yao, Port of San Francisco, Alice Herron, Golden State Renewable Energy, Susan Ransom, SSA International, and Evie Wong at Alba Wheels Up. Our sponsors, aside from the Propeller Club, are the Society of American Military Engineers, Stantec, Noble, Fugro, Jacobs. We have a lot of people from Jacobs here. So just a shout out to you guys at Jacobs. Thank you very much for your participation and your support. Mead and Hunt, Towil, Port of Long Beach, thank you very much for your contribution. Cargill, Port of San Francisco, Port of Los Angeles, Gilbane, which is Mr. Acharya's company, Port of Oakland, and Watermaster North America. Thank you all very much for your contributions. So our 9 o'clock speakers are not yet here, so we are going to go in sequence of our next speakers. And our first speaker is Randy Truby. Randy is a desalination expert. He's an internationally recognized individual. I have been interviewing him and bothering him for years. And he's very patient with me and answers all my questions, even when they're stupid. I thought it would be a good idea for us to have some concept of what the challenges are for water supply in an event where we are increasingly challenged by sea level and flooding, and where it may seem counterintuitive, but in fact, it is necessary for us to have a strategy to be able to access fresh water and fresh water from the sea. And Randy is an expert on that. He is the principal at Randy Truby Associates. He is in San Diego. And Randy, welcome. And thank you for your participation. And you have the floor.
Thank you, Stas, and I appreciate that that great introduction. And by the way, I don't remember you ever asking a silly question. They always challenged me and made me think, so thank you very much for that. I also want to thank the Propeller Club and the rest of your sponsors for giving me the opportunity to talk about desalination today. It doesn't naturally or obviously fit in with a sea level defense conference, but I do think that there are some opportunities, and that's what I want to talk about today and what you and I have talked about in the past, Stas. Seawater reverse osmosis desalination is widely used around the world today. But when I talk about desalination, I'm not just talking about seawater desalting. That's an important part, and I am going to talk about that. But desalination technology is also used for wastewater reclaim and reclamation, and for brackish water treatment. Whenever you need to remove salt from a water to make it usable, that's where desalination technology comes in. And in fact, in the United States, the majority of the desalination being applied is applied for wastewater reclamation and brackish water treatment. However, the seawater process is growing rapidly. Outside the United States, when people talk about desalination, they are really talking about seawater. In summary, what I'm going to do is, and please bring up the slides, Todd.
Sure.
Let's go to the second slide.
All right.
And let's go to the next one. So, and basically what I'm talking about for desalination is using alternative energy to sustainably drive these processes. Alternative energy can also be used for reclaimed water, for wastewater reclaim. And extrapolating very much in the future, you could also use desalinated water to fill reservoirs to create hydroelectric power, which gives you a very interesting source of water in off-peak and non-daylight periods. Next slide, please, number 3. If the Legislative Analysis Office of the LAO of California's report in August of 2020 indicated that sea level rise was going to cost California $8 to $10 billion by 2030, and that there could be as much as a 1-foot increase in sea levels. By 2100, this could reach a 7-foot increase. And that storm surge in LR could increase it significantly. We've had a king tide here just in the last day. Slide number 4, please. Desalination growth has also been going on at the same time. Globally, water demand has resulted in incredible growth in the use of desalination to provide a reliable source of water. This is driven by global population demand. You have an increased water consumption, but you also make more wastewater when you do that. These cities that consume more water produce more municipal wastewater, which is an opportunity for desalination to recover that water. Next slide, please, number 5. If you look at the global growth in desalination, in 2015, there was about 528 million gallons per day of seawater reverse osmosis being installed globally on that annual or that year's basis, 528 in 1 year. By 2019, it was up to 2.1 billion gallons a day. So it's growing at about 40% per year in the use of seawater desalination around the world. Wastewater is not growing as rapidly, largely because it gets used predominantly in the developed countries, but it is also showing a burst of growth right now as people recognize the importance of wastewater reclamation and what a good tool it can be. Slide 6, please. This is a picture of some of these large reverse osmosis seawater systems. These two are in Israel and built by Israeli Desalination Engineering, the same company that built the Carlsbad desalter here in California. Next slide. Slide 7, please, or
It's up.
should be the next one. Seawater desalination concerns. One of the things about seawater desalination, and we need to go back one now. It jumped ahead. One of the 3 concerns about seawater desalination are it uses too much energy. There's an environmental impact that concerns people, and that's twofold. One, the seawater intake will kill plankton and other nutrients in the sea. And 2, that the high salinity brine discharge from these plants could cause a bloom of salt that would have a negative impact on ocean flora and fauna. And then there are social concerns. A lot of people are worried that only the wealthy can afford these desal plants or desalination technology. And then recently, people have become concerned that low-income families are being displaced from housing and appropriate living places because these new desal plants being built. This is a concern in Marina in the Monterey area going on right now. Next slide, please. There is a non-fossil fuel way of using desalination technology, and that's what I want to talk about and what I hope we can do here in California. There's a technology where you submerge the desal plants and you operate them without fossil fuel consumption. You use the hydrostatic water pressure of the sea to drive the process. And you can use solar or wind power to transfer the fresh water to the shore. If you use fossil fuel to transfer the water from these seawater plants to shore, it saves 50% of the cost of a land-based desal plant. But if you can use solar or wind power, then you reduce that energy consumption to virtually nothing other than the capital cost to put in the solar and the wind power plants. Next slide, Todd. The challenge of the submerged plants is broad. This technology was invented really in 1965 was the first patent, and in 1970, Dr. Thomas Peters did extensive testing and demonstrating in the Mediterranean Sea. There's a new company called Water Fountain in Europe that's working very hard to demonstrate this technology. Just the other day, I learned of another company called Water Rise, which I think is an interesting name for them considering our topic of today. And they're going to be promoting and demonstrating this submerged seawater technology. Adoption has been slow, even though the technology has been around for a while, because shore-based desal plants powered by connection to the grid has been the lower capital cost solution, and it has been the technology that was developed back in the beginning in the 70s. Next slide, please. This is a graphic rendering of what this process would look like. The desal modules are lowered into the ocean at a depth of about 1,000 feet. They need a ship-based tender. The hydrostatic pressure of the ocean drives the process, and the permeate gets transferred to the surface and then transferred to shore.
Someone talked about wanting the COVID Command Center to come in and present next month about a new COVID testing site at the PG&E site next to Heron's Head Park, and how come no one knew about it?
Someone mute yourself.
Maybe to make it safe, blah blah blah. Anyway, so
Randy, please mute.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I'm the one who's talking. I shouldn't be muting.
No.
Submerged seawater addresses concerns. Energy is provided by hydrostatic pressure at a depth of 1,000 to 1,500 feet. Plankton and other organisms near the surface are not impacted. The brine discharge is near natural seawater salinity, and solar power can be used to transfer the water to the shore. You would need a battery pack because it is a process that likes to run 24 hours a day, so at night, you would need to use battery technology or fossil fuel technology to drive or transfer the water to shore. Next slide, please. Submerged desal plants, capital cost is a little higher. Location requires that you have 1,000 feet of sea level off, not too far offshore. You certainly must have the solar system coupled with the desal plant, and you will need a battery pack. But you have a new water supply without fossil fuel consumption, which helps California, which wants to reduce its CO2 footprint. And in fact, this would do the same anywhere else it was used. And this should help us with global seawater or sea level rise concerns. Next slide, please. Wastewater also can use alternative energy and be driven by alternative energy. You cannot use the hydrostatic pressure like you can with seawater, but it is used heavily for recycling municipal and industrial wastewater. It is starting to grow very fast, not as fast as seawater, but growing. Approximately $800 million was invested in 2019 in wastewater reverse osmosis installations. And it does use less energy than seawater RO, even when it's using fossil fuels. And that's one of the reasons why it has been widely adopted in the United States and other industrialized nations. Next slide, please. This is a picture of the Orange County Water District wastewater recovery plant. They call it their groundwater replenishment system. They take the recovered water and put it into the groundwater where it mixes with their natural drinking water, and it also prevents seawater from intruding into their natural wells. This plant was installed originally in 1977 and has now been expanded a number of times and is currently producing 130 million gallons a day of drinking water for the Orange County, California area. Next slide, please. Orange County was the first and the biggest for today. However, these plants are all over the world, in Kuwait, Singapore, Australia, and there's many other very large successful wastewater desalting plants. So this is catching on widely on a global basis. Next slide, please. Most wastewater reclaim plants are indirect recyclers. That is, they treat the water and then they put the permeator, the drinking water, into a reservoir or some other, in the case of Orange County, they put it in their groundwater wells where it blends with the naturally occurring waters. Wastewater plants operate continuously over 24 hours a day. They can easily be powered by alternative energy like solar power, wind power, and they would need some form of battery storage, however, for nighttime operation. Next slide, please. An optional future solution, and this is really stretching things significantly, but it has some merit. This was the idea came from a gentleman who wrote an article in one of the newspapers recently that Stas passed off to me. Discharge from wastewater effluent into reservoirs, and that the outfall of those reservoirs could include hydroelectric generators. That before the water gets used, it passes through the hydroelectric generators to generate some power. Water filling the reservoirs does not consume fossil fuel. The energy, well, it would consume fossil fuel to fill the reservoirs, unless you can use solar power to do it. The energy created from the outfall, however, would help offset this and gives you a source of energy at night. And that's one of the real nice benefits of hydroelectric power. Next slide, please. So basically the proposition that sea levels are rising, the use of fossil fuel and internal combustion engines are being restricted, new sources of fresh water are needed, and desalination powered by alternative energy can provide a solution addressing all of these crucial issues. So that's my presentation, Stas. Thank you very much for the opportunity. And if there are questions, I'll be happy to address those.
Stas, you're muted.
May unmute you there.
Sorry, both of our welcome speakers are now here, but there was one question I saw about wave action. Okay, there's a question from, which process of desalination requires more energy, reverse osmosis or thermal? Can this hydrostatic water pressure system be applied to power thermal process of desalination as well? Did you get that?
Yeah, the reason seawater reverse osmosis, can you hear me?
I can.
The reason seawater reverse osmosis is the dominant desalination technology today, is it uses less energy than thermal evaporator processes. So to answer that first part of the question, yes, the seawater desalting process is using membranes, uses less energy than thermal or evaporator processes. You can't use this technology though to drive, you can't use the subsurface hydrostatic pressure to drive a thermal process. It takes heat to drive that thermal evaporator process.
Okay, very good. So we now have our two welcome speakers. And Randy, thank you very much for your presentation. If anybody has any questions on this and you want to address them to Randy, please send me an email at apmargaronis@gmail.com and I will get them to Randy. Randy, thank you very much. This is an issue that we are going to be dealing with more in the future because the challenges of sea level, one of the problems is getting into the water table, and that's a problem already in Florida and in many other parts of the world. So we need an alternative really quickly. So, excuse me. So I thank you for that. Okay, we have.
Stas, quick question. There was one question. Was it answered? The first one. What about wave energy to power submerged desal plants?
Okay, did you hear that, Randy?
Yes, wave energy definitely could be used specifically to transfer the drinking water to shore. And in fact, that's one of the options that I think should be looked at extensively. It would be very useful.
Very good. Thank you very much, Randy. And we look forward to more discussions with you, and we appreciate your contribution here.
Thank you, Stas.
Okay. So we have Heather Tomley and we have Elaine Forbes. Do we have Elaine here? Elaine, I see your, if you could unmute yourself. There you are. All right. Very good. Okay. So we started a little bit out of sequence. So let me get you two back into sequence. Our welcome speakers are Elaine Forbes, Executive Director of the Port of San Francisco, and Heather Tomley, who is the Managing Director for Planning and Environmental Affairs at the Port of Long Beach. Elaine, I know that this has been a very tough year at the Port of San Francisco and that you've had a number of challenges. You also were our welcome speaker last year, and we're very glad to see you again. How are things going at the Port of San Francisco?
Well, thank you, Stas, and thank you all for joining today. The Port of San Francisco is being a resilient organization and doing what ports do, working our hardest to respond to our customer needs and our tenant needs, and taking every day as it comes, really with the best collaboration, communication, and coordination as possible. We've done a very good rent relief package for our tenants to help them stay in place and weather the storm together. We have many retail tenants with the business shut down or deeply restricted to respond to the virus, and our properties not earning the revenue that supports operations up and down our waterfront. So we are like many organizations in a time of COVID, working to hold together, to recover together, to be stronger together in recovery. And that's really the overview of how we are. But I'm very happy to be your welcome speaker today, because despite this pandemic, it is really important that we continue to focus collectively on the massive issue of climate change and flood protection along our waterfront and to save our ports. So thank you so much. And good afternoon to those of you who are joining from different locations. And I want to thank you again, Stas, really for organizing this important gathering, especially now. You know, getting a virtual platform together. It was very good that you were able to do that and keep the conversation going, because it is important to get the best advice from local, state, and national level. So I would start by saying that it's really the comprehensive framework that we need to all work toward, because climate change and resiliency can feel like a local problem, you know, in terms of our conditions and what's coming, but it's really that comprehensive framework that is going to help us solve these challenges with best practices. And a larger resilient effort is greater than the sum of its parts. And it will help us all locally respond to our conditions. And for those of you who are in the world that I am, actually planning and developing flood interventions, you see very quickly that jurisdiction becomes an issue. Sea level rise and flooding doesn't understand governmental jurisdiction, organizational boundaries. So successful interventions do require local partnerships that are best informed by integrated, coordinated conversations, engagement, and best practices. So congratulations again for coming together today. It's a very important conversation. So it's not just about San Francisco, it's not Oakland or Los Angeles, it's about California, it's about coastal communities across the United States and across the world. And it's about all of us as we prepare for an uncertain future. And I'm proud to be here alongside of you with these conversations because they're critically important towards that preparation. For all of you that don't know, the Port of San Francisco manages 7.5 miles of bayfront shoreline from Fisherman's Wharf to Heron's Head Park in the Bayview. The port supports maritime commerce, maintains public open space and access to the bay, and we have about 500 leases and tenancies. And these leases and tenancies welcome countless visitors to the San Francisco waterfront. We also have partners and developers in our adaptive reuse plans for former industrial areas that are no longer active to create sustainable communities and adapt our public trust mission to the needs of the city and region today. The port is home to iconic landmarks, renowned cultural museums, destinations, and activities. Before COVID, we were welcoming about 24 million people a year. Right now, our public health officials are asking us to welcome very few, to be very cautious regarding the virus and protect our people and visitors. We're at a very pivotal point in our history in San Francisco. Today, we have the opportunity to start laying the foundation and creating a waterfront for tomorrow. We also see that if we do not seize that opportunity, our enterprise will erode in terms of its value and its safety. I imagine many of you are in similar situations as you grapple with some of the questions, as you grapple with the questions we're grappling with in San Francisco. How to balance competing demands and priorities from the public, how to finance really large-scale infrastructure projects that implicate other systems, city systems, state systems, regional assets, how to ensure that the port we know and love will continue to thrive as a hub of regional economic, maritime, and recreational opportunities in light of climate and sea level rise challenges. At the Port of San Francisco, we really began our resiliency effort on the seawall segment of our 7.5 miles of waterfront. And we selected this segment because that segment provides flood protection to the city for about 600 acres of the downtown, and many, many important regional infrastructure is provided flood protection, from the BART to the Muni to utility infrastructure. So we knew that our harbor, our port harbor that we so rely on, in addition to providing for port activities, is the barrier to the city. We were very fortunate to receive $425 million from our voters in Proposition A to begin planning and making actual capital interventions to provide for earthquake security, stronger earthquake measures, and also for flood protection. It's a 10% down payment at best for what we have to accomplish in rebuilding that section of the harbor, but it's a really important down payment because we just completed a very important study, the multi-hazard risk assessment, which gives us the data and information we need to plan future capital interventions for earthquake and flood as we move the project along. We've since expanded our effort to our entire 7.5 miles of waterfront, which has been very good for us because we need to start planning and preparing for the entire waterfront. We are in collaboration with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. We're partnering on a flood study to reduce, it's a reduction strategy for considerations of federal investment. This flood study is looking at different ways to protect the San Francisco waterfront and the cost of inaction. It could lead us up to $1 billion federal contribution to our project. We're at the very early stages of the study, however, and we look forward to more as we go. In addition to our own public work that we're really taking a lot of efforts with at the Port of San Francisco, developers and the development of our property will play an important part in providing for flood protection resilience. And we have 70 acres under redevelopment now doing exactly that, of former industrial lands. So I'll briefly tell you about those projects. At Pier 70, we have 300 homes under development, well, not all under development at the moment, but ultimately we'll be 3,000 homes, including a 30% affordable. When this project is complete, there will be 9 acres of new parks and open space, and those new 9 acres will be raised, and the whole site will be raised to prepare for 5 feet of sea level rise. This project will also generate special taxes that the port can use for sea level rise improvements that aren't on that site. Just to the north, we have the Mission Rocks project, about a similar size, 28 acres. It's another key project that will create thousands of new affordable homes, actually with a 40% affordability requirement, raising again the site 5 feet. And providing again those special taxes. So here I'm using developer revenues and project proceeds from new value that the development will create to prepare our shoreline and give it resiliency for flood. I also would like to let you know we're providing more ferry infrastructure, and our ferry infrastructure and facilities are responsive to sea level rise. So later you'll hear from Brad Benson, our Waterfront Resiliency Program Director, and he will review this, some studies and other key findings on the California panel. So the port is not just focusing on adaptation. We are also looking at our operations as well in environmental matters and making sure that our footprint is as green as possible. Because as I am spending all of my time really responding to the results, the consequences of climate change, it's good to play our small part in reducing emissions and being part of a greener future. So in that, we're looking at our port-owned equipment, our electric cars, our charging stations. We have electrical charging for our cruise ship. And we have improved our ecology of the bay through our restoration projects and will continue to do so as we rebuild our harbor. The Port of San Francisco has always been a place of innovation, I'm proud to say, and now is exactly the time to be innovative, to consider ways in which to reduce our risks over time from rising tides. I really look forward to learning more about all the efforts you're undertaking and joining with you to transform our coastlines and prepare for our future. Thank you again, Stas, for organizing this convening, and thank you all for your efforts. Thank you.
Elaine, thank you very much. And after Heather's finished, we're going to open up for questions in case anybody has any questions of either of you. So thank you very much. Heather Tomley. Heather Tomley is the Managing Director for Planning and Environmental Affairs at the Port of Long Beach. Heather has been the lead person in addressing the zero emission clean air action plan that has been embarked upon by the ports of Long Beach and Los Angeles. She is the person that the port relies on for a lot of the decisions that are being made at the second largest port in the United States. So Heather, welcome. And how are things at the Port of Long Beach?
Morning, Stas and everyone. You know, I think Elaine put it very well. We're working through, we're all, I think, dealing with very similar challenges of how do we continue to be successful and meet the needs of our customers and keep cargo moving for the benefit of everyone, but do it in unprecedented times when we're dealing with really significant challenges, really focusing on how do we keep the workforce safe and healthy while we continue to move forward. And so we have had to demonstrate a lot of creativity, a lot of flexibility, a lot of empathy, and working with all of the different stakeholders to figure out how we can continue to be successful. We had some very trying challenges in the very beginning. We now are in the ports of Long Beach and Los Angeles dealing with cargo surges and record-breaking numbers of cargo trying to catch back up with some of the downturn that we saw in the early months. And so the challenges are presenting themselves in different ways as we continue to move forward. And so I think that that's something that we, as a Port of Long Beach team, are continuing to try to balance and work together. But at the same time, we're still focused on all of the other efforts and programs that we have underway and continuing to do what we need to do for the environmental goals that we have and the planning that we need to do going forward for our project. So I'm here this morning on behalf of Mario Corradero, my executive director. He unfortunately was not able to attend, so he asked me to join in and provide some welcoming remarks for the day. I really appreciate what an eager group you are. You already got started before we had a chance to do the welcoming remarks, but thank you for the opportunity to be able to make some comments and welcome everybody to the conference today. We wanted to stand with the Propeller Club and the Society of American Military Engineers and all the other sponsors and welcoming you back for this conference today, the second day. And I think it looks to be an exciting agenda for today. So I think that'll be great. It's clear to everyone that's participating that our business and how we go about conducting ourselves has been really fundamentally changed over the last couple months with the work that we're doing and trying to respond to COVID-19. And I think it's great that this conference is able to adjust to that, just like we're trying to adjust to everything in our daily lives. And you've been able to offer this virtual forum, which I think is a good way, because these are important conversations that need to continue. And I'm glad that you were able to develop a forum where people can continue to discuss these important topics. Like all seaports, we at the Port of Long Beach are keenly aware of the hazards facing our coasts in the coming decades. And while COVID-19 and the subsequent economic downturn have impacted port budgets and our immediate priorities, the coastal hazards we face have been exacerbated by rapidly advancing climate change. Our own studies have confirmed that the Southern California coast is already impacted by climate change and extreme storm events. And we've even had impacts several years ago when Hurricane Marie came through with storm surges and caused some significant damage to our breakwater and some of the outer areas of our port. So we've experienced that, and we're still working through the capital improvement plan program to make the corrective actions related to addressing the damage that was done all those years ago to some of the roadways in the outer harbor area. We all know that warming ocean temperatures are contributing to increasing hurricane activity. And on the West Coast, extreme heat is contributing to wildfires, burning millions and millions of acres of forested watershed that's meant to channel rainfall and snowmelt to creeks, streams, rivers, reservoirs, bays, and out to sea. Never at any time in our history has the West seen this kind of devastation. According to recent reports, the polar ice caps are melting many times faster than in the 1990s, endangering wildlife, coastal communities, and our seaports. As a result of all this, of course, is that rising sea levels are one of the most damaging long-term impacts of the climate crisis, and it's something that we feel directly at the ports. We've considered these impacts in our climate adaptation and coastal resiliency plan, which was approved several years ago and is directing our prioritization of actions going forward for how we respond to the anticipated climate impacts, and so that we and our stakeholders can prepare for what is likely the outcome of the damaging effects of climate change. There are many things that ports can do to adapt. We're fortunate at the Port of Long Beach that we have strong partnerships with our community and our stakeholders, and this is also an effort that our city of Long Beach has taken very seriously and has engaged in their own planning and resiliency efforts, which are the city's adaptation plan is going to be moving forward to the City Council for approval here in the coming months. We understand and share the concern for the vulnerability of our coastal community, and we're fortunate because our stakeholders and our community partners get the importance of planning and preparation. At the Port of Long Beach, our engineers and designers always take climate adaptation into account when it comes to building new infrastructure and designing new infrastructure projects. The newer areas of the port and the outer harbor, from the inundation mapping that we've done, show that they have been built at a height and with a stability that is more protective of anticipated climate change effects. But some of the older inner areas of the harbor are more vulnerable, and those are areas that we need to continue to address going forward. One of the changes that we've made in recent years is in our harbor development permits, we require that every project that comes forward consider their vulnerabilities and what they're going to do to address those climate change impacts. So all new developments going forward need to address those issues. And we're also doing our part when it comes to climate change to reduce greenhouse gases through our Clean Air Action Plan efforts, which were mentioned. We're rolling up our sleeves and we're on the road to zero emissions. And we have right now $160 million in zero emission projects underway at our port. And we're looking at testing and developing brand new pieces of zero emission equipment for both terminal equipment and on-road trucks. We've also moved forward with shore power for vessels that come in to our harbor. And we have successful programs like our vessel speed reduction program, which also significantly reduce greenhouse gases by slowing ships down and having them operate at a lower load and put lower load on their engine as they approach the port. We're looking at ways that we can continue to move forward to meet our aggressive greenhouse gas reduction goals for the port. We've seen the inundation maps for our port, and we're all aware of what's at stake. Time is of the essence, and regardless of pandemics, trade wars, other inevitable challenges, and the results of climate change are something that we are anticipating and that we're planning for. And working together, it's a challenge that we are working to meet. So thank you, and thank you, Stas, for the invitation to participate today. And I think it looks to be a good day ahead with lots of interesting discussions.
Thank you very much for your remarks. And we are very appreciative that you were able to fill in for Mario. We're very grateful that the Port of Long Beach has been this is the second year that you've been a sponsor, both San Francisco and Long Beach, of the conference, and we appreciate what you've done. I want to, do we have any questions from to either Elaine or Heather? If not, I have one question. Heather, what's the status right now of the your Clean Air Action Plan? That is that what you're referring that's going forward to the City Council?
No, that's the city's plan. So the city is also working on their own greenhouse gas reduction and climate adaptation plan. What they're doing in the city's plan is incorporating the efforts that we've already identified through our planning with our Clean Air Action Plan and our climate adaptation plan. But this will be a broader city plan addressing different challenges. We are focused specifically on the port area and what we need to do for our port infrastructure and the terminals, operating terminals. But in many ways, the challenges on the city side, dealing with residences and established communities that don't rebuild on the same kind of schedule that we rebuild on in the port, they're facing some very significant challenges. And for folks that may not be familiar with the city of Long Beach, it tends to be pretty low-lying and flat, and so it has a lot of vulnerabilities where climate change and storm surges and coastal flooding are anticipated to be a real concern. So we're working with them on that. Our planning efforts have already been underway for many years. Our Clean Air Action Plan, the most recent update to it, was approved in 2017, and that's where we charted the course to move towards zero emissions in the terminals by 2030 and for on-road trucks by 2035. And we also, in that plan, adopted the statewide greenhouse gas reduction goals of 40% reduction by 2030 and 80% reduction by 2050. So that effort is underway, coupled with our adaptation planning work.
Very good, thank you. Seems to be a geometric, I'm not sure this is a question, hold on. Seems to be a geometric rise in damage caused by major events in the Pacific Basin. Are these trends over the past decade predicted to continue to be accelerating in the 2020s? I think it's fair to say that that's probably the case, but I think we'll just hold off that one. Heather, Elaine, I want to thank you both for welcoming our attendees. I'm sorry for the mix-up in time. We got sort of moved around, but improvisation is something that we have to do all the time. I'm very appreciative that you both found the time. Elaine, thank you very much for all of your good efforts. We will be looking forward to Brad's presentation later on. And good luck to both of you at Long Beach and San Francisco. And again, thank you both very much for your support.
Sorry, Stas, there's one more question for Elaine.
Okay. Can you read it?
Yeah, what kind of ecological restoration is happening in San Francisco Bay?
Thank you for that question. So There's a lot of detail my team can provide, but I'll provide the high level detail, which is essentially, as I see it, is adding nature back to the bay. So our shoreline is overwhelmingly was filled lands. I mean, filled lands now 150 years ago. And we have a hard urban edge along a good portion of our waterfront. Other sections are have more nature, but when we restore the harbor, adding back nature to help bring in carbon, as an example, through simple things like adding nature-based plants that thrive in the bay, that welcome the fisheries, adding types of species that are good at capturing carbon, like clams, these types of things, simple solutions that really restore our hard edge to provide more ecology.
Okay, thank you very much, Elaine. With that, I think we will start our next panel. Our next panel is from the ports of New York and New Jersey. And I said the Port of Long Beach is the second largest port, but on some days it's the Port of New York and New Jersey. So I don't want to get in any trouble with Jorge and Sarah on that. Our first speaker is Jorge Chavez. He is the Assistant Director of Ports at the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. Jorge, thank you very much for being able to make this. And you and I talked a little bit about how the port is dealing with some of the challenges that came out of the Hurricane Sandy situation. And how are you guys doing? And tell us what the game plan is.
Excellent, Stas. And again, I appreciate the invitation for the Port of New York and New Jersey. And, I hope that you guys enjoy the presentation.
Thank you.
So, again, as Stas mentioned, I'm the Assistant Director for Capital and Port Planning for the Port Department. I'm joined by my colleague today, Sarah Cola-Zurdo, who is the Senior Climate Resiliency Specialist. She works with the Port Authority Engineering Department. Together, again, we'll present on behalf of the Port Authority today. I'll start the presentation by providing you with a brief overview of the facilities, our interim and long-term plans, and highlight a key upcoming project that we have upcoming in the future. Then I'll turn it over to Sarah, who demonstrate how we're implementing our resiliency and sustainability objectives in future projects. After the presentation is completed, we'll be happy to answer any questions you might have. So regarding the Port Authority, we are a landlord port model. We lease maritime facilities to container terminals, auto, bulk, and cruise operators. We are the largest East Coast port in regards of container volume. In 2019, our facilities handle approximately 7.5 million TEUs movements. We hold 3,000 acres of waterfront property located throughout the New York Harbor. We also own 4 intermodal express road facilities serviced by 2 Class 1 railroads, CSX and Norfolk, with Conrail as the local operator. Due to our intermodal facilities and railroad partnerships, we can deliver goods to over 50 destinations in Midwest, New England, and Canada. And I'll just give you a quick look of our facilities and our partners. In 2019, a Port Master Plan study was made public, which provides a comprehensive and flexible roadmap that charts the course for future growth and development at the port. This 30-year plan takes a holistic look at the port, mapping out the next generation of land use and infrastructure development projects, allowing the port to remain among the nation's leading maritime highways. As highlighted on the slide, one of the 5 guiding principles of this plan is to ensure that sustainability and resiliency is included in all operations and future developments. Needless to say, the port is fully committed to resiliency. Superstorm Sandy struck the port on October 29, 2012. with winds up to 90 miles per hour. As depicted in the photos, extensive flooding occurred due to the storm surge along with a high tide. The New York Harbor recorded storm tides of more than 9 feet above mean higher high water. In preparation for the storm, waterways closed on October 28th and not fully reopened to vessel traffic until November 4th. Our facilities incurred $112 million in damages. Our individual port tenants claim as much as $17 million in damages. Outlining the impacts of this storm were limited capacity for weeks, obviously, with major supply chain effects, lack of electrical power for several days, damage to cargo, handling equipment, imported autos, cargo loss, temporary flooding, destroyed crane motors. One common vulnerability across all of our tenants was the electrical infrastructure, which was flooded during the event. So what do we do about it? In the short term, we obviously updated our hurricane preparedness plans to identify high ground staging areas for equipment to ensure that they didn't get flooded or destroyed again. We also executed a Sandy recovery program, which was partly funded by FEMA to be able to replace the damaged infrastructures and upgrade facilities to protect against future storms. As a lesson learned, critical electrical infrastructure were either elevated or relocated away from flooded areas. And we established a contingency plan with our partners to make sure that we had available backup electric generators against a future storm. As far as the long term, over the past several years, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, with the collaboration of non-federal partners and other regional agencies, have been studying the feasibility of protecting the entire New York, New Jersey harbor. The alternatives being studied range from a no action to surge, gate, and flood wall alternatives. Though this study is currently on hold pending federal funding, it represents the region's holistic response to future storms as far as defense. If this study were to yield a project, a structure like this will serve as a first line of defense for the port and the rest of the region. Though this is an ambitious project and hopefully will become a reality in the future, it will take many years before it's implemented. The Port Authority has already updated its resiliency and sustainability design criteria in order to protect our facilities against future storm events. Every project needs to comply with the criteria, which includes the analysis of sea level rise and wave action, and the selection of flood event based on the specific location and service life of the new infrastructure. Sarah will provide more details on this on the next future slides. Additionally, the port actively coordinates with our tenant on the inclusion of resiliency and sustainability into the privately financed project that they are executing. My last slide today is going to talk about the wharf replacement study. We studied this study a couple of years ago to ascertain the condition of our 13 miles of existing wharf system so that they could provide recommendations as far as rehabilitation and reconstruction. One of the major challenges and decision points that we had throughout this study is to whether to rehabilitate or reconstruct our wharf system to a new elevation to comply with new standards. Based on a worldwide outreach of our industry, what we found out is that for new port facilities, they built to the new elevation criteria and new resiliency criteria. However, for existing infrastructure, for the most part, they remain at existing elevation. And obviously, in the study, several solutions are being considered to the team. Again, keeping the wharf at the same elevation or raising the wharf elevation, or even the thought of installing seawalls to protect our facilities. With that, I'll turn it over to Sarah, who will provide you with more details on our criteria. Sarah?
Hello, thank you, Jorge. Yes, my name is Sarah Colacerdo, and I'm the Senior Climate Resilience Specialist in the Engineering Department at the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. And you all know that port facilities are on the front lines of climate change, and I want to thank the Propeller Club of Northern California for having us and convening all of these experts and leaders and practitioners from around the world to share ideas on how to adapt to climate change's impacts. So I want to start by acknowledging how lucky I am to work for an agency that has recognized and championed climate resilience for a pretty long time. In 2008, our Board of Commissioners updated our sustainability policy to mandate that the agency develop strategies that reduce the risk posed by climate change to its facilities and operations. And prior to this update, the sustainability policy was essentially geared towards reducing greenhouse gas emissions, whereas the update explicitly recognized that some amount of climate change is baked into our future, and we need to understand and anticipate and adapt to these impacts. And I really can't overstate how important it is to have an adopted policy that provides a really solid foundation to address climate change, no matter what the political climate is. Next slide. So one of the main ways that we carry out our sustainability policy is by implementing the engineering department's climate resilience design guidelines, which were originally issued in 2015. And the guidelines speak to 4 main climate stressors facing the New York, New Jersey area: sea level rise, worsening storm surge, extreme precipitation, and extreme heat. But at this time, the guidelines are most explicit about addressing sea level rise, and we take a code plus approach. Building code typically requires that structures in the 100-year floodplain use a design flood elevation that protects to the 100-year flood elevation plus a safety factor. And the first code plus approach that we use is to add a sea level rise adjustment to the design flood elevation. And the sea level rise projections that we use come from the New York City Panel on Climate Change. And as the NPCC continues to incorporate best available information in new studies and observed, they update their projections about every 4 years. And so we point to the latest and greatest projections. So the graph here shows the range of sea level rise projections provided by the NPCC out to 2100. And the Port Authority uses the midpoint between the 25th percentile and the 75th percentile sea level rise projections, which equates to 36 inches by 2100. Next slide. Slide, right?
You don't see it? Climate resilience, okay.
I hadn't, but now I do. For our latest update in 2018, we expanded our Code Plus approach to apply the sea level rise adjusted design flood elevation into both the current and the future 100-year flood plain. So, you know, y'all know ports very well, and you know that our infrastructure has to last for decades and decades and decades. So we can't just rely on the FEMA flood maps, which are based on historic data. And to illustrate this point, this map displays the 100-year and 500-year floodplains at Port Elizabeth, and you can see that the majority of the facility is purple, indicating the less flood risky 500-year floodplain, and the blue shaded area around the perimeter, sort of lapping at the edges of the facilities, that's the 100-year floodplain. And then if you could click forward, Jorge. Oh, sorry, go back. Did it? Let's see. Is there?
There was no effect.
Did the map change at all? It's not changing on my end. Interesting. Okay, well, imagine that this map of Port Elizabeth in the 2080s is almost entirely blue, indicating that the 100-year floodplain has shifted inland and upland with sea level rise. And so if we're designing a structure today that we intend to last for 50 years or even 100 years, we can't apply our resilience standards only in the 100-year floodplain at the edges. We need to think about where the 100-year floodplain will shift and make sure we're applying our guidelines there as well. Okay, next slide. Through experience and vulnerability studies, including the wharf replacement study that Jorge mentioned, the engineering department has learned to screen ports projects for various climate-related vulnerabilities. And when we approach a project, we try to think broadly about potential impacts, including those that are creeping and chronic, those that are acute and short-term, and also interdependencies and cascading impacts. And the goal is to bake in resiliency into every small, medium, and large project. And on this slide and the next slide, I have an overview of how we anticipate that sea level rise, storm surge, and extreme precipitation will impact various port assets. So starting at the water, we have electrical infrastructure, fenders and bollard systems, ship-to-shore, crane motors, and outfalls. And some general impacts we anticipate if we were to not take resilience measures would include higher storm surge elevations damaging electrical and mechanical equipment and crane motors, the relative air draft of ships to wharves and mooring systems changing, possibly placing greater or different stresses on the existing fenders and mooring systems, creeping submergence of our outfalls, which would reduce the effectiveness of our drainage system, reduced underdeck clearance that might lead to more challenging and more costly underdeck repairs and inspections, accelerated deterioration of bulkheads due to continued flushing or inundation that could lead to loss of fill and subsequent upland sinkholes. And in the lowest lying areas towards the very end of the century, we think we might start to see inundation during high tides causing nuisance flooding. Next slide. Okay. Continuing upland from the water, we're mainly worried about storm surge events and to a lesser extent, extreme precipitation, which without resilience measures could lead to higher and more extensive storm surge, damaging, again, buildings and cargo and electrical and mechanical equipment and crane motors. And rising groundwater and the reduced capacity at the outfalls could lead to reduced drainage capacity throughout the system, and overtaxing the system and maybe a too small of a system would compound the issues of extreme precipitation causing potentially ponding and sinkholes. Next slide. But we are an engineering department, so with every challenge we add to our menu of design options to try and increase the protection at our ports from climate impacts. So some strategies require complete implementation across a facility before they create value, while others can be effective as individual or incremental projects, and these can be scaled and layered to increase protection. And some of these design strategies include raising, enlarging, or increasing the number of outfalls, installing backflow preventers, protecting critical assets by elevation or dry and wet flood proofing, constructing seawalls at the perimeter, and when building new facilities or replacing wharves, looking into raising the wharf deck or adding provisions for future deck raising and or adding seawalls. And we've heard the term adaptive capacity a couple times yesterday and today, and that's really important to us, especially when you don't know for certain what magnitude of sea level rise we might eventually experience, especially with really big investments. So one example of adaptive capacity is adding structural strength to new wharfs so that in the future, if need be, we can raise the deck or add a seawall or both. And next slide. Finally, beyond addressing sea level rise, other long-term resilient measures that we want to keep on our radar include upgrading our stormwater drainage systems from the source to the outfall to limit disruptions from extreme precipitation, ensuring that our materials and electrical and mechanical systems can handle extreme heat. Some operational improvements might include various climate impact tracking, such as documentation of operational disruptions and damages from climate-related events, operational health and safety standards and incident tracking, and integrating telling indicators into our asset management system. And finally, fostering relationships with with our tenants, neighbors, utilities, intermodal transportation agencies, and other peer agencies for a comprehensively resilient marine transportation system. Thank you.
Sarah and Jorge, this is a very detailed and comprehensive analysis that you have provided, and you are both to be congratulated. There is a lot of very detailed information here that you give us that we need to start thinking about, and I really appreciate what you've done and the effort that you put into this. Thank you both very much. I am going to open this up for questions. And since I don't see any, let me start asking both of you one question, which may seem like a stupid question, but if you could explain it just for us outsiders. If a Hurricane Sandy was to hit the port today, You've obviously made a lot of measures here to strengthen the situation. How confident are either of you or both of you that you will have a lot less disruptions this time than last time?
I'll take that question. So obviously, I think it's a great question, Stas. You know, we're talking about lessons learned, and you know, what we lived through Sandy roughly about 8 years ago, and so what are we doing better now? And obviously, we can raise the infrastructure of all of our facilities by 8 or 9 feet to avoid being flooded. But again, as part of the presentation, what we highlighted is the addressing and mitigating the risk by relocating the electrical infrastructures. There is a lot of, in the upland areas are pretty much, for the major container terminals are pretty much parking areas. We have preparedness plans as well, where if we know that such an event is coming, we're going to be able to store the equipment in high areas and safe places that are going to be able to withstand the storm. It's not going to be perfect, you know, because obviously perfection costs money that is prohibitive, but we're in much better shape than we were back in 2012.
Okay. And we have a question here. Let me see if I've got it here. Arvin, can you get that question for me? I can't see, mine is not.
Yeah. Question is the Port Authority flood mapper that was shown publicly accessible, or is it an in-house tool?
Did you hear that, Jorge?
I can answer that one. So our flood mapper is, well, it's a two-part answer. There's a New York City flood mapper that is publicly accessible, and New York City always has cool mapping tools. And so that was something that they put out a few years ago for the 5 boroughs. And we do have port facilities on Staten Island and in Brooklyn. And so that was very helpful. And so our planning department basically replicated what they did for the New Jersey side. So the Port Authority's flood mapper is essentially for just our New Jersey ports. And we don't have that up on our public website. But you can check out the same thing for New York City and see some of our other facilities.
Jorge, you referenced the regional barrier that was proposed by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers that was withdrawn under the direction of the president. Since there will be a new administration in January, do you feel that this proposal will be back on the table soon?
It depends. I don't have my crystal ball with me, Stas, but I think we're very optimistic that this is a serious issue, and you know, I think it's a serious study, it's a viable study, and we hope that at least the study is completed so that it could provide options for the region of New York and New Jersey as far as what are we looking at for the next 20 to 30 years.
Very good. Okay, Arvin, do we have any other questions?
No, so far not.
Okay, very good. Okay, Sarah, Jorge, thank you both very much. Good luck. I'm sure we're going to be talking to you again at a future time. These problems are not going away, but the really good thing is that there's 2 very talented people at the ports of New York and New Jersey at the helm, and congratulations to both of you.
Thank you, Stas. Thank you for the invitation, and good luck with the rest of the conference. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Okay, our next speakers are from the Netherlands, and they are Mark Walraven, Senior Advisor, Storm Surge Barriers at Rijkswaterstaat. That is the Dutch National Waterways Authority. Port of Rotterdam, Joost de Nooijer is coming back for a second visit with us. Joost is the civil engineer at the Port of Rotterdam. And Matthias Boos from Royal Haskoning, consultant on flood risk management. They come to us from the Netherlands. It's later there. We very much appreciate that you guys stayed up to stay in touch with us. Mark Walraven, welcome. We're very grateful to have you here and to hear from you about ice storm and the strategies that are being developed at Reich Waterstock.
Thank you very much, Stas. Try to share my screen with you all. Find my presentation. So, thank you very much. I suppose you can see my screen now.
We can.
Okay. Thank you very much for being with you today and being invited. And as you said already, I'm from the Rijkswaterstaat organization. Rijkswaterstaat can be compared with the Corps of Engineers, which we work a lot as well. And I'm not a real specialist, but have been manager in Rijkswaterstaat for a long while, and actually being in practice on the storm surge barriers, being responsible for the maintenance operations, also for the Maesland barrier. And I'm still the leader of the operational team. So when we have a closure on the Maesland barrier, I will be in the lead of the operational team. So I will share some practical experience today with you all from that perspective. And I would like to share this screen first, as we all have, I think, three things in common. One is that we all tend to live near the coastline with fertile grounds and a lot of possibilities to have easy transport back inland and outside via sea. Secondly, due to that fact, we all suffer from floodings every now and then, and it's not only ancient history, but it's more recent as well. And thirdly, I think even as important is that we have in common that we only respond when we have had these kind of catastrophes. So apparently, we need those catastrophes to start to respond and to get the political interest in doing something against it. So this is some picture of the 1953 disaster in the Netherlands when we really suffered floodings. And it was really the beginning of the Netherlands to start the Delta program and to be sure that we will be safe in future. You can see here an overview of the Dutch storm surge barriers. 5 of them are on the southwest region, and they were all built in response to the storm in 1953. And the upper right one was built later on, so it's not part of the Delta works. But these are the 6 storm surge barriers we at this moment maintain and operate in the Netherlands. And to see them a little bit more closely, it's good to have a look at all of them. What I think is very important to recognize if you look at these is that they're all different. And that's something that happens worldwide. And there are reasons for it. Every location is different, the depth of the river is different, the function of the river might be different, the age in which they were built, the technologies that were available, the money that was available, even political preferences might be applicable. So that all means that those storm surge barriers will differ. And you can imagine that that will give some challenges for maintenance and operations later on. And that's something, the reason why I show you this picture a little longer, to keep that in mind. Oops, it's not going the right way. Sorry for that. This is the Maesland barrier. It's one of the biggest robots in the world. And you can see here, it's pretty close to the Port of Rotterdam. On the background, you see the Port of Rotterdam. The Port of Rotterdam is not being protected by this barrier as it's on higher ground, but I think the next speakers will talk about it as well. I stick to the Maesland barrier itself. And as I said, it's a really, really big robot actually, because it was originally designed to operate automatically. And this is the barrier I mentioned. I'm leader of the operational team, so I've experienced what it is to close this barrier and actually to shut off the Netherlands. And it's big, it's pretty big. You can compare it with the Eiffel Tower. And the joke we sometimes make is, only we have 2, one on the north side and one on the west and the south side. And this is something that we have in common as well, I think, because the design and building period of these kind of structures always get a lot of attention, a lot of financial support. So a lot of people are attracted and interested in really doing the design phase. But to be honest, the challenge begins afterwards. if you have to maintain, manage, and operate these kind of structures for more than 100, even 200 years. And that's the thing I would like to share with you, and the lessons learned that we have. And of course, there are many, many lessons learned, and I can only share a couple of them, but it's good to keep those ideas in mind. So just 2 examples for now. This masonry barrier was constructed with a kind of ball joint. The ball joint is a 10 diameters, 30 feet steel ball rotating as a shoulder wrist. And we thought it would last for very long, but only already after 5 years we got problems. We got technical problems. We had an unexpected rapidly wear, so we didn't have that expected. And secondly, there were additional environment rules. So the law changed and we weren't allowed to use specialized coating anymore. So there were things that weren't foreseen. So we had to do additional maintenance on the short term, but on the longer term, we immediately after 5 to 7 years, we had to do a redesign, but of course was pretty costly, just as a technical issue. And secondly, even for the masonry barrier in 2006, we were front page news. And as you see it here, it says in Dutch, so I can imagine not all of you can read it. It was originally designed as a fully automatically storm surge barrier. So the idea in the 80s when we designed this barrier was people shouldn't interfere, because then it's not that reliable. It should be a computer. And all we know now, a computer is not available. So we discovered that the reliability of this storm surge barrier was not in 1 in 1,000, but was 1 in 10. So within 10 years, we had to do some redesign. And at that moment, we decided to introduce human being as a more important role in the operational team. And we moved towards probabilistic asset management to be sure that this barrier is always as reliable as it should be. And that's how it works in the Netherlands, because we have a law that defines the reliability rates of all dikes, and within those dike rings we have those storm surge barriers. So we do have a certain level of reliability that we have to aim for, and we can calculate every action that we take if it contributes to that reliability. And during all those years, because these things I show you now is just 2 examples of one barrier, but if you saw the first slide with all the differences between all those barriers, you can imagine there are many, many challenges to face with all these kinds of different structures. And I just pick out some just to give you some impression. For example, there's a lot of focus during the optimizing from design. So when a lot of design groups are starting the design philosophies, it's usually not taken into account what it does mean for maintenance and operations. Even there's a lot of situations that these storm surge barriers are being designed, and it's not even known which organization will be responsible for maintenance operations. And our advice always would be define first who's going to be responsible to have them involved in the design process, because they will really ask different questions as they will feel what it is to be responsible for the maintenance operations. Secondly, the design is mostly unique and a prototype. As you saw, they're all different, and my expectation in the future is that worldwide it will be different as well. And one of the, you see some lessons learned, and one of them is subsystems are generally designed for other use. For example, in the gate of the masonry barrier, we use pumps, and those pumps are originally constructed for the sewerage industry, which means 24/7 use in a wet surrounding. And in our barrier, they're standing still and totally dry. So we have to figure out ourselves what is the best maintenance strategy for these kind of parts to be sure that it will operate to a certain level of reliability when needed. And as you know now, the masonry barrier we only used for storm conditions now 2 times in 25 years. There will be always stress on the required knowledge and experience. And that's really often underestimated, because a lot of knowledge will be gained during the design process, but you need this knowledge afterwards when you do the maintenance operations. But you will find out and you will figure out that there are failures, or there are parts of it that respond another way than you thought of, as I showed you with 2 examples within 10 years of the masonry barrier. So the high reliability requirements demand really a professional asset management to be operational in your organization. That's really a challenge if you have to maintain such a kind of structure to a certain level of reliability for 100 or even 200 years. Because regulations, policies, and organizations change frequently, but in most unpredictable but significant influence. For example, I work for the Rijkswaterstaat organization, and we're responsible for these kind of structures. I think we're doing an okay job, but even our organization will be influenced by politics to make certain policy decisions. And often that doesn't fit really to these kind of really typical structures, because they demand more knowledge, sometimes more investments, and more understanding how they really work. So within that perspective, we're gathering within our organization, but also worldwide, what are those lessons learned? And we haven't had them worked out all already, but we've really defined four themes, 4 areas: politics, policies, organization processes, technical innovation, and knowledge and craftsmanship, on which we can all capture those lessons learned. And that's something that we really would like to share others before they start designing, building storm surge barriers, to keep those lessons learned in mind. Because it's maybe not that difficult to design a structure like this. It's of course a little complicated, but the maintenance operation organization are crucial. Therefore, that's something that we would like to advise to pay attention as much as possible to. And therefore, we do have an international network, iStorm, that can be an international organization to learn from in that perspective. And to tell you a little about the international iStorm community, this is Andy Batchelor, the boss manager of the Thames Barrier in London, and myself. And we met in 2005 at the Thames Barrier. And that evening, we went to a bar, we drank a Guinness, and to be honest, another one as well. And there was a lot of recognition. We had really a lot of recognition that we operate these complex structures within a bureaucratic organization every now and then within the government, with a special relation to contractors, high challenges related to contractors, related to cybersecurity, related to all other aspects. And we thought we have to start some kind of cooperation because we really understand each other. And that was the basis, a good glass of beer, to start the iStorm network. And nowadays we're an international network. You see a big group here for the iStorm, for the Thames Barrier, one of our annual meetings, what we have now. And to be honest, our aim is to better protect people, places, and property from flooding, and to share our scarce knowledge and experience that we have to help others, to help each other, but also to help others and new barriers worldwide, doing projects together, to do research, to make all kind of capturing lessons learned and share those with each other. And nowadays, we do have a kind of organization, but it's still based on informality, because what we want to do is bring those specialists together and have them learning from each other, learn those topics, what they experience during the field. The Corps of Engineers is one of the 4 core members now, and we cooperate a lot with them. I just heard people from New York. I was there in November to share some lessons learned with the people from Philadelphia, New York, Corps of Engineers. So we work with them, and you see here an interesting picture of the core barriers. Upper right, Venice; bottom right, Thames Barrier; bottom left, New Orleans; and bottom on the top left, the Maestland Barrier. You see, they're all different. It's not only in the Netherlands, it's worldwide. And nowadays, iStorm has, apart from the 4 core members, also the barrier members, organizations that are building storm surge barrier or have them, and associate members, all kind of companies and technical universities. But you only can become a member if they really have to bring some knowledge into us. So it's not a platform to gain new work, no, it's a platform to share knowledge. So we get a lot of applicants who want to join, but only when they have really experience and can share it with us, then they will be allowed to join this knowledge network. And for example, it was mentioned yesterday by Bill Merrill as well, and Tony William from GLO and Texas A&M. We facilitated a design workshop at Galveston. And in that design workshop, we facilitated about 40-50 people from the network joined and shared knowledge and expertise to the benefits of the Corps of Engineers, who had to design the first storm surge barriers. And we don't say what's good or right, or we don't say anything about wrong or right. We only say, this is our experience, make use of it. It's not that something that we decide what's good or wrong. And we do it at other places as well. For example, earlier this year, we went to Venice and we had an operational review, and just to help them out to make the change from an organization that's building into an organization that will do the maintenance operations the next couple of 100 years. Because such an organization will face really challenges ahead, as I just showed you a couple of them and can tell you more. And as I said, we also had a visit to New York and Philadelphia earlier, and we work very closely with the maintaining organization in New Orleans at the moment. So just to give you a brief overview and hopefully stress the urgency to have an organization in mind that will be responsible for maintenance operation, to incorporate that within the design phase when these kind of structures will be thought of. Thank you very much.
Mark, thank you very much. And this is a really a global view of the problem, which I think is very urgent for us to have. And obviously, you've already done a lot of work in Galveston and New Orleans, New York and Philadelphia. And these insights are very, very valuable. I would say the most urgent one for us is that we really need to start fast tracking the deployment of these kinds of barriers. And we heard yesterday the progress that's being made in Texas. We're going to be hearing a little bit about later on about what's going on in San Francisco on a more modest level. But clearly Texas and New Orleans have benefited from the insights and ideas from Reich Waterstadt and from Ice Storm. One of my takeaways here is that the investment in this infrastructure is not a static venture. It is a constant movement of change and expertise of varying conditions, of varying technologies, and varying politics, unfortunately. Something that obviously you know very well because of your international experiences. We need to do more of it because we have an inland waterway system that, as we heard to some extent yesterday, was designed in the 1930s and still has not been replaced. In any case, we are going to take questions at the end of the presentation. Our next speaker is Joost Neuer, a civil engineer from the Port of Rotterdam, who is returning for a second year, this time virtually. We had him here last year. Joost, thank you very much for making yourself available. And please tell us what is going on at the Port of Rotterdam.
Thank you, Stas, for the invitation again. I will start sharing my screen first. Can everybody see it?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Well, thank you, Stas, for the invite. I will first introduce myself. I'm Joost Neuer. I am born in a village very close to one of those storm surge barrier Mark had a picture of in his presentation. So for me, flood risk management was something well, very close to home. I also lived in a city which was very attacked by the storm surge in 1953. So that was quite an impressive event for a lot of the people in our villages. I also know. So I think something like that has made me very interested for this field of research. Now I'm working at the Port of Rotterdam as a civil engineer, as a project manager for making adaptation strategies for flood risks at the Port of Rotterdam. When I started to build this presentation, I thought, what are the interesting topics for the all attendees from USA? What are the similarities and comparisons between our Dutch approach and the USA approach? And I think two main points of attention are very interesting. One thing which could have ingredients for your approaches and methodologies is the way we did our stakeholder management during expansion of Maasvlakte 2, and also during the way we make our adaptation strategies right now. And also the second one is the methodology we use for that. I think in that methodology, there are also some ingredients which are interesting to tell about. I will first start with some figures. You can read it, I won't mention everything. It's interesting to say, of course, we also feel the impact of the pandemic. I think the impact on volumes in this year will decrease by around 9% in total volumes. A lot of trade and business is going on, happily. Well, we as Port of Rotterdam, we develop the port, we manage and exploit it also, and we try to do this in a sustainable and a safe way with speedy services. And Port of Rotterdam has been a governmental organization till about 2003, and since then we are, you could say, semi-independent organization. So we aim for commercial benefit, but we have shareholders, and those are only two: the municipality of Rotterdam and the Dutch state. And we are a landlord port as well. We give guidance to the port in terms of spatial planning, and we own a lot of assets in public space. Well, this is a slide you have seen yesterday during the presentation of Jeroen Aerts. You can see that the port expanded during the centuries in a seaward direction. Well, and also the elevation of the port has improved, has been higher and higher, and that's of course due to that it's closer to the coastline, and also due to the fact that insights about sea level rise were slightly changed. You can see that most of the port, the land of the port, was developed till 1970. So the elevation is mainly based on the insights of about 50 years ago. And yeah, you can understand that insights has changed, and especially in these parts which has been developed till 1970, there's a lot of oil and chemical business. So there's a lot of value and possible environmental impact as well. Jeroen told a little bit about Maasvlakte 2. That's the last expansion we had in the seaward direction. I will shortly tell something about this as well. Also was some figures about that. Maasvlakte 2 is really an interesting project, and also because of the stakeholder process we had. We started plans for this land reclamation in the late 90s already, maybe in the 80s, I'm not quite sure. And of course, if you think about developing seawards, some stakes are at risk. For example, nature, ecology, recreation, fisheries, etc. So you have quite there's quite a probability that you have some opponents during the realization of your plans. So it's very important to approach all stakeholders in a way that you can work together, that you can develop your plans, but there is also something to gain for them. So for this development, we use the mutual gains approach. And with this approach, it's quite, no, I wouldn't say quite easy, but the aim of that is turning the opposites into a partner position. And of course, this won't work for every aspect and for every stakeholder, but well, at a certain time in period, there is enough support to go to the next step of the project. And that's the way we did it. And something which is very important in this is that Jeroen mentioned this yesterday also, that it's very important to if there is something to gain, the stakeholders will follow you. So it's one of the possibilities is to enlarge the scope of your work. And that can be done by compensation and mitigation measures. It's very important to listen what your stakeholders really want and how they can be compensated, mitigated, or even and it can even help them forward in approaching their goals. So that's something we did, and I think a nice story about this is that there was one association of surfers which had a really good spot for surfing in the south of this area, and they were very afraid of losing it. So we did a lot of analysis and modeling, wave impact, things like that, and we took this into account in our design as well. And now, after realization, this surf spot, the new one, is even better than the one before. So that's really a way of turning your opposites in, with the nose in the same direction, as you could say. Well, then we step back to the adaptation strategies. Well, Mark already told a little bit about the reliability rates of the inner dike area. It's very important to know that the Port of Rotterdam is completely in an outer dike area. So that means an area without any embankment. And you can see it in the picture right below, with all blue colors being the polders at a very low elevation. And the port, of course, is outer dike area in a very much higher elevation. There are storm surge barriers. Mark told about the Maasvlakte of the Maaslandkering, of course. We are very happy with the Maaslandkering because it's an open barrier, which is very positive for shipping. For example, instead of a sluice on this position. Well, from a technical point of view, the elevation is different, but also from a legal point of view, there is a large difference, and that's very important for our adaptation strategies. Because government is completely responsible for all dikes and embankments to keep them on a reliability rate. So the government is protecting people and companies living in those polders. And that's regulated by law. In outer dike area, there is no law, so we are outlaws. And well, there's only a policy, and that policy says that asset owners in outer dike areas are responsible for damage due to flooding themselves. And then you come to the question, who are owners in this outer dike area? Of course, Port of Rotterdam, we own a lot of land here, and we give it to our tenants. but they have a lot of assets themselves, like oil tanks, a lot of infrastructure. There are railways. Rijkswaterstaat earns some assets as well. Utility companies, there are a lot of owners. So it's quite unclear what is the exact governance, what is the responsibility for everyone owning assets in this outer dike area. So you can also ask yourself who's responsible for sea level rise and for flood risk events. So this is the question based on which we started to think about making adaptation strategies. But well, you can start from that point to have an enormous discussion about the responsibilities. But we started to analyze the problem. So that's and that was a good decision to make, because if you analyze the problem, then you really know what problems do we have. Do we have any problems? And after that, you can start discussion about possible measures. Well, it's necessary to say that the present risk level in the Port of Rotterdam is not very high, so that gives a lot of confidence. But of course, with sea level rise, it increases, and we have to take measures. So starting so early is not a threat and just an opportunity. That's why we started. Well, of course, we are the most logical partner to take the lead as a landlord for this outer dike area. So we started to develop our flood risk management program with the goals you see here. We had to gain more insights in the risk and vulnerability. Because of the high elevation, there was not very much awareness about this topic, and we had to make adaptation strategies as a result of this. Now, how do we make it? And I will tell you something about the methodology, which seems to be very logical. Of course, we look at the risks. And the risk, of course, is probability times consequences. Probability, like everyone, we make flood maps for different years, different climate change scenarios and probabilities. And this is also a flood map you have seen in the presentation of Jeroen yesterday. This is a starting point, this analysis. Then we look to the consequences, and you can divide it in different types of consequences. And it's good to say, of course, in the Port of Rotterdam, economic effects are the most important to have a look at. About this consequence, and especially the economic consequences, Matthijs Bos will tell you more in the next presentation. What we did is not only a quantitative approach by huskhouding, but also qualitative. So we asked the tenants what are the consequences of flooding if you see these flood maps, and so we got a lot of insight in the total consequences. Then the next step, and that's something what is forgotten most of the time, is ask yourself, when are you going to take measures? You have to define a certain threshold if you accept your risk or you don't. And we do it based on risk, and for example, not on only probability. That's something you see a lot of times. I think it's better to do it on risk calculations. Well, there are different methods for it. We have made a framework for it based on a comparison with the threshold we use for the inner dike situation. It's very difficult to explain, but I would like to tell that. If measures are necessary, we approach it by the multi-layer approach, which is based on 3 types of measures you can take: prevention, do something in your spatial planning, or more in crisis management. From all the measures, we build a strategy. You can see right below in the picture, the strategy we built for a part of the Poort-de-Waal-Eemhaven complex. And it is divided in smaller areas in which different measures should be taken during time. All the different colors are, the period in time measures are necessary based on the framework we have made. It's very interesting to say also that if you look at the wharf elevation, Mr. Chavez talked about, if there are key walls, most of the time the best solution is dry proofing and raising and protecting the vulnerable assets to a higher level. Well, of course, we didn't do this together, but we did it with a lot of stakeholders, again, in different workshops, based on the joint fact-finding principle. Well, and something we really discovered is that from cost-benefit ratio, you can easily conclude that measures are most effective if they are part of other investments. You are not going to take a specific measure for a lot of costs only for improving your flood risk. That's crazy to do. I would mention one remark about the cost-benefit ratio, because we are speaking a lot about benefits, and benefits, it's good to think about that it is not a real profit. It's not a real profit company gains or someone gains. It's only reduced damage. And if you are a decision maker and you have to spend money because you want to improve risk from 1 in 100 to 1 in 10,000, that's quite difficult. You don't earn anything because of this. So maybe in situation where recovery costs are extremely high and probabilities are also very high, well, it's more easy for decision makers. But after the stories yesterday, then it's still quite complicated to make these type of decisions.
We're running a little bit behind on schedule, so I'm just warning you.
I'm sorry. This is the last slide.
Okay.
Yes, so I'm finishing in a minute. Well, where are we right now? The actual status. We are almost finished with making strategies. Our whole board has a strategy in a couple of months, so that's nice to tell you. What we also have done is that we implement flood risk management and this topic in our own processes, in our own contracts and our own development projects. For example, we have an advice in every project, and we also in the contracts with our tenants we put in clauses about who is responsible for it. We have in-house tooling. It's not online yet, but that's a step for next year. For flood maps for our strategies. I think it's really interesting to see when it's really online. We are also finishing the Maasvlakte strategy. That's the last one. And from next year, we will even more come in contact with our stakeholders, again, for this topic, also helping them implementing the strategies by showing our own case, how we did it, and help them with good solutions in a toolbox, things like that. So that's where we are now. It's also the end of my presentation. So thank you, Stas, and I'm happy to answer your questions.
Joost, Thank you very much. We're going to, everybody hold your questions until the next speaker, and then we'll open it up for questions for all three of our Dutch presenters. Thank you very much for your return visit. Not everybody knows that you're a European famous concert and organ artist. So you have a day job at the Port of Rotterdam, and we have heard your very fine music that we still have at home, and appreciate your participation very much, Joost. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stas.
Okay. Our next speaker is Matthias Boos. He's a consultant for flood risk management and coastal engineering at Royal Haskoning. Matthias, good morning.
Hi, how are you?
Very good.
Yes. Hi. Hi, Matthias Bos. Yes, I'm here to talk to you through flood risk adaptation through digital tooling. I've been working with Royal Haskoning DHV for over 10 years now. And actually, I did my master thesis in New Orleans together with the Army Corps on dredging strategies. So I like the presentation of yesterday to get an update again. And I've also been working with the Port of Rotterdam, as Joost mentions, for over the past 4 years as their lead flood risk expert, and making the strategies Joost is referring to. Next to that, I'm also working a lot for the World Bank on this topic to create climate resilient communities. And also by doing all this work drives me to develop our own in-house tooling to do flood risk analysis, and that I will also show you. I will dive directly into the assessment Joost already introduced. So we're at the Maasvlakte. So what you see is that it is newly reclaimed land. The building ended at 2013, so like 7 years ago. As you can see at the left, you see the orange area. It's about 1,000 acres of reclaimed land. And at the right, you see there are a few spots, like 3, that are already occupied by new tenants. But actually, most of the area in the green in the red circles is still not in use. And yeah, so there is they plan to use it, of course. But that will be new tenants will come in over the next years. So what it is, this presentation is about how and what would be an appropriate land level for these tenants. And of course, there was a design philosophy, and that design philosophy was that looking at 2050, so the future scenarios, that there could be 50 centimeters of water depth, like inundation depth, on your site at the 1 in 10,000 years exceedance, or at a return period. So that was the design philosophy, and then you would need like a 5 meters land level below above sea level. And then also it was stated that every new tenant, together with the Port of Rotterdam, should look at what level they should design their site upon. So it can even be higher or maybe lower if there are different uses. And also new legislation came in, like in 2015 in Europe, that like CVSO companies, like oil companies or chemical companies, got stricter regulations on flood resilience. So they need to be protected. So now the Port of Rotterdam asked us to look into what should be appropriate land levels. So how to do that? So we looked into the reference land levels. So these can be different for use. And also we looked at 3 different land levels with like every time an increasing like protection level, so decreasing in risk. And then we looked at climate scenarios. So we look into 2050 and 2100. So we look at 1 feet or let's say 3 feet of sea level rise. And so for that, we created the flood risk maps or the flood maps. And by that, we have the basis to do economic damage calculations based on the land use or like the asset inventory and these climate scenarios. And on these damages, we can also calculate the flood risk. And then the third step would be to do a cost effectiveness analysis and to calculate the cost benefit. With these analysis, we can give a guideline what should be like the future land levels for different types of asset inventory. So now we have this assessment, and so what I already announced, we have in-house tooling. It's called the Global Flood Risk Tool, and this is a cloud-based platform that delivers accurate and comprehensive flood risk analysis. Dive into it briefly. So what does it do? So it's a cloud-based platform. It's online. We could bring back computation times from like 5 hours to like a single minute. We could do that by using parallel computing and not using only your desktop, but over thousands of computers at the time, by like clipping rasters and combining rasters at the time. So it's all GIS based, and yeah, it has high performance. Yeah, we moved away from license-based software as it could not handle like the licensing connections. So therefore, we started our own software, and we created that by open source packages like GDAL, Python, and a lot of yeah, they call them NumPy and Pandas within Python, and GeoServer to store like all the data we create. And we use Amazon Web Services to do all the calculations. Also, of course, there are security issues or policies. So we have everything protected by Smart Society. So you need to have a login to get into it. Yeah, and how does it look like then? You already see a picture of the user interface. And what is this, the capacity or the capabilities of it. So I mentioned the online service. It's very fast, but also visually attractive. So whenever a calculation is done, your GIS map is automatically published into the tool, into the online tool, and shows you like the map with its characteristics and details. So it does the land use, it shows the land use, it calculates the inundations, the damages, and the risk, and also then gives the substance to do the cost benefit analysis. And then in the end, it enables decision makers to do to create those decisions. Here it is on the outputs. So here you see we did I show you the flood scenarios for 2050. So it starts with like no flood with the 300 years flood, but then increases for like a 10,000 year scenario up to like a 2.5 feet, if I say it correctly. Yeah, to imagine 10,000 year storm, yeah, it sounds very high for a US perspective, but from expert judgment, I've learned that you perhaps can compare a 1 in 10,000 year storm with a 1 in 500 or 1,000 storm in the US, as you have hurricanes, and we do not have these. So yeah. Here you can also see the baseline of the design. So with like, let's say at a 10,000 year storm, over like 50 centimeters to maximum 70 centimeters of water. But then looking at 2100, yeah, the inundation increases, and you can see levels up to 4 feet. And now you want to know how can you do the damage assessment. So we have this asset inventory on the site. We use damage functions from literature, and by talking to the tenants. We have the land values from literature as well, but also verified by the tenants. And we did indirect damage assessments as noticed yesterday by Jeroen Aerts, and we worked together with him on this. So then you get these damages. This is the same picture as shown before. So we get these for all the scenarios we created, and based on that we can we can develop our flood risk. So this is my last slide on that. So in the end, you see you have different asset inventories with all the outputs. So you get all the KPIs which belong to the flood risk assessment, and in the end your benefit cost ratio. And with that, yeah, you can map these for different asset inventories for different scenarios and different flood risk or protection levels. And then in the end, yeah, you can do a recommendation or like a conclusion on what would be your advice. So the conclusions I have here is like, it's recommended at least to further increase the land levels, as the preliminary land levels are maybe a bit outdated. It's good to make distinction in protection levels and also look at different use. And always, as also stated before, not always the highest protection level is economically sound. So it can be that a low protection level is better for your use. And in the end, of course, now we just elevate the whole sites, but you should further detail your measures. And then depending on the type of assets, yeah, additional measures like crisis management would be required to further reduce your risk. And then last, yeah, of course, reach out to me if you are interested in the presentation or want to learn more. Thank you.
Matthias, thank you very much for this. And one of my first question to you would be, are you working with anybody in the United States developing this kind of system?
Not yet.
Okay. Let me, Arvin, do you want to check our questions here for our panelists, please?
Yeah, so we have a question. What is the lesson learned regarding keeping the knowledge and experience of operating and maintaining the storm surge barriers within the Rick-Waterstadt itself and not relying on contractors? What has proven to be the right balance? Oh, it's kind of a long question. Hopefully you got it.
Okay, Mark, did you hear the question?
Yes, I can hear it. I can read it.
Thank you.
I can tell you there's not an easy question, not an easy answer to this question. You could expect that our organization as Rijkswaterstaat, as I said, comparable to the Corps of Engineers, does have a lot of knowledge within its own organization. But to be honest, after the building period, we had some specialists connected to our organization with their knowledge and expertise, but they leave the organization as well in a couple of years. And we had a lot of changes within our organization. For example, when the Dutch government decided to have less government and more industry, when we lost a lot of knowledge in our organization as well, because no minister then thinks, what does this mean for storm surge barriers? It's such a small field and everybody expects it stays at a certain level, but nobody really checks if that's the case. So we had our lessons learned in which we lost a lot of knowledge in our organization, and to regain that knowledge, that's really a challenge. And at this moment, we're in the curve upwards again, in which we really try to regain knowledge. And I myself, with some specialists, wrote a knowledge strategy for storm surge barriers for Rijkswaterstaat. And we can share that knowledge as well. And slowly we're getting there, that we get more knowledge in our organization and introduce more people to this field. But that's to be honest, a constant struggle. And if you don't have that really in the picture, it's difficult to do professional maintenance operations in these kind of structures. So we have our lessons learned, and to be honest, there's not really an optimum. Optimum changes through ages as well. And depends even on the knowledge fields, because some knowledge fields you really have the knowledge in home, in your own house, and the other knowledge fields you can rely a little bit more on the industry. So it's long and complex, but not really answer as easy as this.
Okay, well, I'm going to interject for just a second, because you've raised a very interesting long-term political issue here, privatization versus in-house. And so let me ask you, is your feeling that increasing the expertise within the organization provides a level of expertise and benefit that ensures long-term development?
Yeah, I would answer positive to that question or that statement that you make. Yes, for sure. Yeah.
Okay, that's an affirmative, correct?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Okay, all right. Okay, Arvin, next question. You're on mute, Arvin.
That's it so far.
That's it so far? Okay. So
maybe Stas, I can add one remark then, if I allowed to.
Yes, please.
That is, the reason I said that is that mostly it's governmental organizations that will be responsible for the maintenance operations of these kind of structures, because no company can really take the risk if a storm surge barrier would fail, with all the damage it would consist in the hinterland. So it's mostly governmental organizations, and to be good in professional maintaining and operating, you need some kind of minimum expertise in your own organization. So my advice would always be, as a governmental organization, invest in in-house knowledge for those specific fields that are really critical, and define which knowledge fields you could rely on the industry.
Thank you. Now I see Joost shaking his head up and down. Joost, do you want to comment on this?
Yeah, I totally agree with what Mark says. I think within the Port of Rotterdam, of course, we are semi-governmental organization, but we also have made a shift towards getting more expertise in-house, and for the quality of our own assets, it's very positive.
Okay.
And the maintenance.
Okay. Now I see some agitation on Matthias's. Todd, could you mute, please? Matthias, yeah. I see some agitation in your eyes here. I may have imagined this. Do you want to comment on this?
No, sorry. I totally agree that that clients should also have in-house expertise to complement also consultants they hire. Definitely.
Okay. So Matthias, intelligence capability,
yeah.
Is that correct?
We're working towards that, but it's an early stage still.
And if I understand you correctly, by a continuous process of inputting new data, you improve the performance and the calculation and predictive capability of your system. Is that correct?
No, it's more like the more variables you do, the more insights you get. And where in earlier days the computation times were so long that you could only you were bound to like one or two variables, and then your time or your budget was down. And now it'll go so fast. You can look at multiple variables and getting more insight. And indeed, in the future, I think it will go into that direction. That maybe even the program itself can do predictive outcomes.
So
but not yet.
We're not there yet, but I hear you saying we're getting there.
Yeah.
And your choice, we discussed this, the choice of Amazon Web Services. There's been some critiques in the media and by writers about piling in very sensitive information into one place. Amazon Web Services has done an excellent job doing a lot of calculations, and they do Amazon a great service. Are you concerned at all about having your information safe on that platform?
Yeah, no, in some sense, yeah, I think so. Yeah, in the end, it's all encrypted to that service. So I don't know if they can really do something with it so easily. And yeah, and as stated, we are also thinking to shift to Azure in the future. So we're already starting to migrate. So yeah. So to me, it's not the most, yeah, it like the service, it provides the computational effort. And so that's a good thing. But in the end, also the online basis also enables you to do that parallel computing.
Okay, so you are looking at a second source, but
yeah.
Okay, I'm correct about that. Okay. In terms of the work that you do, in terms of the information processing, do we need a better, I mean, looking in the future, trying to help communities around the world, do we need higher performance computers, better software? What is it that we need?
I don't think you need better computers as you run your models on the cloud, so that's not really needed. I just have my own very standard laptop, and actually only an internet connection suffices. Yeah, but of course, in the end, there's always you need an expert to do these kinds of analysis, as flood risk is very hard to grasp. That's what we noticed with going all over the world. So it's always good to have an expert helping you to do these kinds of assessments.
Very good. Okay, thank you very much. Arvind, do we have any other questions? That's it. Okay. I want to thank all three of you. Mark, you gave us a very excellent overview of what the global situation is. And I think that we are in a process where you've warned us that we can't stay static anymore, that it is a constant improvement and a constant knowledge situation. And even in terms of the bolts that we have anchoring our systems, that we've got to be aware that there's going to be a constant need for maintenance and change. A message that I hope will eventually resonate to the U.S. House and Senate about the need for constant infrastructure improvements. We talked about that a little bit yesterday. Joost, thank you once again for your insights at the Port of Rotterdam and how you have been anticipating change there with the Maasvlakte 2 terminal complex. It's a real modern marvel. Thank you very much. And Matthias, again, thank you for also coming back and giving us your insights about how we are in the process of going into a brave new world. Thank you all very much. We are now at our 15-minute break here, so we will give everybody a chance to go get a glass of water and retool. When you come back, Derek Chow from the Hawaii Harbors Department will be our first speaker, and Joseph Gellings from the Port of Seattle will be our second speaker. And at this point, you know, because we're getting behind, I'm going to say that we're going to come back at 15 minutes past the hour. So we will begin again 15 minutes past the hour. Derek, you're first, and Joseph, you're second. Thank you very much, and see you in a few minutes.